So welcome, thank you for coming, whether you're here now or some other time in the future. This has been a topic that keeps coming up, I'm sure, for lots of people, but certainly over the last few weeks in particular, I've been participating in two 21-day challenges. You know, there's always these challenges that are available to us, 21 days, 30 days. And there's these, New Year's resolutions and all of these things that we participate in the hopes of creating better routines or habits in our life. And so often they work for a short time and then we kind of fall off often. So what is the difference between a habit that is created and sustained versus one that's not? One of the challenges that I've been in has been a really interesting one because it was a really simple little thing that we decided to do together. There's a group of about 40 of us. And we decided, the leader of the group decided that what we would do is we would drink greens. We would have a drink of greens, athletic greens to be precise, but it doesn't really matter what the brand was, for the next 21 days. So this simple little act of incorporating this drink, which takes but a few moments out of our day, how do we incorporate that into our day for 21 days? So the first week, it was decided we couldn't judge it, right? So we had to just kind of embrace it and do it, right? Make the commitment to ourselves that this was somehow going to be incorporated in our day and that we were going to do it every day. So we made the commitment to doing it without judgment. And the second week, we shifted or made some shifts to the time that we took it, as an example, to notice any of the differences that had both on us physically, but also mentally. And then the third week, which is usually when people start to forget that they were doing the thing, right? We fall off partly out of it's not quite a habit yet, routine, but other things in our life start to spread out again and take over. So we tend to just forget. So the third week was really focused on making sure that we kept the awareness of the commitment that we made to doing it. And again, this was a really simple little thing that we were adding to our day, but it was very interesting because the same resistance, right, to the creating of the habit or the ritual or the routine was the same, regardless of whether it was this small little thing or a larger change in habit. Mental resistance and thoughts come up, the same critique, which is why at the beginning, often what stops us is, well, I don't like this, or this is hard, or, you don't really need to do this. And that little voice inside of us kind of says, maybe you shouldn't do this. And we listen sometimes to that voice and it stops us from doing those things. And so tonight I really wanted to talk about some of the neuroscience or the things that we're learning, and especially in terms of learning and memory and how that affects habits. And of course, a little bit about habits itself. So I kind of came up with 3 rules, if you will, or life hacks for what we can do as we consider how to incorporate or create new habits in our life. So, of course, for those that maybe don't know me, I'm Glenda Miles. I'm a psychotherapist. I specialize in grief and trauma particularly, but also the intersection of Western psychology and Eastern practices, in particular yogic philosophy and Buddhism. I'm a practicing yoga and meditation teacher and been teaching for about 12 years now. And Mindful Healing Space was created to create a container for the practices of mind and body that support our journey back to our truth and to from wherever we might be to our truth. So I'm going to quickly go through kind of 3 things. What are habits? 3 rules for cultivating strong habits. And okay, what do we do with all of this information? What can we do now? So what are habits? Habits are simply automated, repetitive patterns of behavior controlled by our subconscious. Automated, repetitive patterns of behavior controlled by our subconscious. So these are the things that are not in our conscious thinking. So we, as we move every day, if I lifted my right arm right now, I might actually be able to think and say, okay, I'm going to raise my right arm. That's in our conscious level of thought. There's our heart beating right now. That's in our subconscious or unconscious level of thinking. We don't have to think about that. It just happens. And habits are very much that, our brain's way of very much allowing us to free up space by automating these things that we do every day. And in fact, the research shows that about 40 to 45% of our daily activities are actually habits. So think about how you get up in the morning. When do you wake up? Habit. How do you get out of bed in the morning? How do you put on your socks? The things that you just automatically start to do, how you brush your teeth, the routine that you have for getting ready in the morning, your drive to work, often for many people, which is a scary thought, but how we exercise. Think about if you go to an office, and remembering those days when we used to do that, but even if you work at home, how we often even engage in that activity is very much this habitual action. So opening up the computer, logging in, turning on the lights, these are just things that we do without really thinking about it. 40 to 45% of our day are habits. That's a significant amount of our day. And so what I want you to think about is rule number one, repetition matters. Repetition is probably the most important, which is why it's rule number one. To create a habit, repetition is needed. Our brain consumes a lot of energy. In fact, it's thought that 20% of all of our energy is used by the brain for its daily consumption in its daily consumption, pardon me. So when the brain automates things, it does so to conserve energy. So think about it. We do something, we do it every day. The brain goes, hey, let's automate this so that it becomes just like the code, if you will, right? That operates underneath the conscious thought, which consumes less energy than us actually thinking about something and doing it. Now, the problem with this is the brain doesn't really deem what's important from a good, bad quality, if you know what I mean. So I'm going to put those words to it, but it's not saying, oh, this is really a good thing, so we should do more of it. It's simply saying you do this a lot, and therefore it must be important. So again, frequency and repetition is telling the brain this is important. So think about that. If you come home from work every day and you sit on the couch and you turn on the TV and you consume a lot of TV, that's a habit that's created and sustained over time, but it might not be very good for you. So the brain isn't deciding what is good or bad, if you will. It is simply deciding that which you do the most needs to be automated and therefore becomes habit, that pattern of behavior. So here's what we know. When we start to learn something new, neurons start to fire together, right? Saying neurons that fire together, wire together. And this is very much this. So think of creating something new, the linkages between those neurons is weak. But the more time it fires, the stronger the connections, those links between the neurons becomes. The stronger the connection, the less energy it takes the brain, the more automatic it becomes. brain likes efficiency, so it very much will create and strengthen these connections. So lots of times people will say, well, we need to break a habit. We don't actually break a habit, you create a new habit. And those new neural pathways become stronger over time. The stronger they become over time, that we use that one more and another one less. The one that we use less becomes weaker connections. The one that we use more becomes stronger. So we don't really break it. It's always there. And if we started to do it again, the old one, those connections over time, as we did it more and more again, would become stronger and stronger as it was before. And because it had the connection already, it would become stronger more quickly than creating something new, which is why the beginning of learning something new or building new neural pathways is the trickiest, is the hardest, right? It's hard to build new habits, but once the connection is built, it becomes easier to maintain them. So it requires a lot of things. So let's think about habits from this simple exercise of there's a cue, there's a routine, and a reward. Not unlike other kind of patterns of learned behavior. So if anybody's ever worked in a government organization, you can probably relate to this. I remember my first time working with the Alberta government, and I was sitting in my office, and everybody at a certain time, around 10:15, got up from their desk and they were going to the office or into the elevators. And I remember asking someone like, what's going on? And they're like, oh, it's coffee break. And they would go get on the elevator or walk down the stairs, go to get a coffee, have a little chat, and then come back and go back to work. And I saw this, you could almost set your clock by it. In fact, it was so predictable. At a certain time, everyone got up, went down to the coffee shop. There was a reward, right? The coffee and the chat with coworkers, which reinforced the pattern. And so you could, and I'm sure people just knew intuitively what time it was because of the routine being so strong, the habit becoming so strong over time. And this, of course, is the same kind of thing that happens in lots of other behaviors that we have. So rule number 2 is you have to be aware before you can change. So once you become aware of that cycle that we just went through, you can start to make changes to it. So the time between the cue and the actual behavior, there's an urge, right? The trigger is the cue. The urge to behave is a certain thing. Once we become aware right in there, we can actually choose a new behavior. It's harder between, obviously, the other areas. That's kind of the sweet spot, if you will, where we can insert a new behavior, just noticing the urge to behave a certain way after that cue or that trigger, which is not unlike many things. Right? So this is similar with the cycle of addiction, with any learned behavior that we have. So at first, this new behavior takes effort, it takes ability, and it takes motivation, but again, becomes stronger and stronger over time. So imagine right now that over the next few days or week, you write down everything that you do, considering the smallest of things to the largest of things. And remembering that 40 to 45% of our daily activities are habits. So do you know what your habits are? Are the ones that you have, are they putting you on a course to reach your goals, to being, the best version of ourselves, if you will, or do they represent who you are? And asking yourself these things honestly. So once you kind of have some awareness of what those habits are, you can start to then sense what those cues might be and change if you wanted to change the behavior, insert a new behavior. Again, we don't break habits, but we can create new habits that can replace old ones. The third rule, the simple, but really important one, is slow and steady wins the race. Most people, when they start to make a change in their life, they just take a whole bunch of things and start just making a whole bunch of changes. And although that's admirable, it's really hard to sustain that much change. Making small and steady steps and slowly adding different steps, small steps builds towards progress, which also builds those neural pathways, making them stronger and stronger and stronger. So often, again, those baby steps, although it doesn't seem, right, it takes a little bit longer to see the progress, it is more sustainable over time. So in Atomic Habits, James Clear talks about, how walking every day for 10 minutes is better than going for an hour walk once a week. Why? Small incremental steps, frequency, repetition is there, so it's every day. And it's easier to build in intermittent rewards when we do something every day. So intermittent rewards tend to be better than every day, whatever that might be. So if it's going for a walk every day, instead of giving yourself the reward every day, is at the end of maybe every week, when you've done it every day, you kind of give yourself a check mark or whatever the internal reward is. It's really important, though, to appreciate that we all have this inner critic. And this is especially at the beginning of creating a new habit, is to be aware of and befriend our inner critic or a saboteur who gets in the way of us making healthy choices, or making good choices, or making those choices that are perhaps opposite to the current habit. So we want to be focused on getting a bit better every day, as opposed to really making these huge leaps forward. Most change is small and incremental. That is actually sustainable, gradual. Remember that rewards at certain points along the way, intermittently, which also then kind of calms that inner critic, by making sure that we appreciate the progress that we are making. This is a really important part as well. So the data actually shows that sheer repetition number and failure accumulation is the best predictor of learning rate. It's interesting, right? Both. So thinking about, how do we learn how to walk? We learn how to walk by taking baby steps, right? Falling, getting back up, taking another step, falling. So there's failure involved, but in the failure, our body learns, and we get back up and we try it again. And through the trying, we learn. And the same is true when we're building new habits. Failure is part of the process, and a necessary part of the process, in fact, to learn and grow, which is one of the reasons why shifting our focus from thinking that we have to do something in a certain way, and instead allowing some flexibility within the learning, and simply saying, okay, it has to get done, as an example. So if it's walking every day for 10 minutes, making sure that gets done, but how it gets done, where it gets done, learning, allowing yourself the curiosity to learn, is a really important part of creating the habit that is more sustainable over time. So repetition and failure are necessary parts. Think about the fact that people who tend towards perfection, for instance, so an unwillingness to fail, or a discomfort with failure, are not going to try as many things, and therefore not be able to learn as many things, because of that need. So our ideas, again, kind of going back to that inner critic, can certainly keep us away from learning and growing. Our adaptability, when we befriend our inner critic, if you will, is much more likely. So we know, especially with adults in neuroplasticity, repetition and our willingness, right, to be able to fail and see that as part of the learning cycle and the way that we actually create long-term sustainable habits. So repetition, failure, focus, and intermittent rewards are the necessary components to building habits, or those automated neural pathways. If people aren't familiar with him, he's a great one to follow on Instagram, a poet and writer. Young Pueblo says, "Do not expect perfection from yourself, even if you have done a great amount of inner work. Progress is acting intentionally more often than you act blindly, and not punishing yourself because you still have room to grow. Allow mistakes to peacefully inform your growth and learning process." It really speaks to this idea of how we approach things, our willingness to make mistakes, to fail, to continue to focus, be aware, becoming more and more aware instead of acting blindly, and just allowing ourselves the opportunity to grow and to learn is very much a necessity for building good habits. So let's start. I challenge all of you listening, whether you're listening live or later on, is to pick a new habit that you want to start. But I'm going to challenge you to think of something that takes 10 minutes or less a day. And it can be as simple as, starting the day with some water to drink, or drinking a little bit more water, or going for a walk, or doing something, but again, 10 minutes or less a day. Why? Because we want to start with something that time is not going to be a factor in your success. So I challenge you right now to pick something. For the next 21 days, I want you to try and do this. In fact, I challenge you to do it right now. Whatever that might have been, do it right now. Start today. Take the next 10 minutes and do it, whatever it might be. Commit to doing it. So the first step, of course, as we did make a decision, is to commit to doing it. 10 minutes or less every day, no excuses. We schedule it into our day. We figure out when it's going to happen, and it becomes something that we commit to doing for ourselves. It helps to have visual reminders, right? I will have a download that you can kind of fill out and mark off as you do each day, because having some visual reminders keeps it that focus, making sure that you do it every day, repetition, allowing yourself space to kind of learn and maybe mess up as you're moving through it, and be okay with that. And recognizing that some days are going to be a little bit harder, recognizing also the mental challenge that may be present for you as you add this into your day. Notice, become aware of what the mental kind of ideas are that are going on in your head. What's your critic saying? How are you trying to potentially sabotage yourself? So today is May 20th as I record this. And in 21 days from now is our new moon meditation on June 10th. So that's 21 days. So I challenge you to do it for 21 of the 21 days. In fact, promise yourself right now that you'll do it no matter how you feel. Because this is what we know. Our feelings come as a result of our doing. When we do things, we feel, right? So as when we do things like exercise or take care of ourselves, we feel better. So often people think about, well, I don't feel like it. It's like, well, the doing comes before the feeling. If you want to feel better, you have to do something. So what is it that for you right now in your life that would feel so good if you could do this thing? And how can you actually make that happen? How do you not only challenge yourself to do it, but make a commitment to yourself? Again, keep it small, keep it really simple, and just start to incorporate this one thing and notice what happens. Once you're done, you can start something else and add on to it in those incremental steps that we talked about. But we don't want to take on too much, which is probably what most people do at the beginning, right? They're like, I want to get healthy, so I'm going to start eating right, and I'm going to start sleeping good, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. And for about 3 days they do, and then they start to fall off. So in this case, small steps, repetitively done every day, allowing yourself a bit of focus within it, not the failure of not doing it, but the failure in the doing of it. Keeping the focus, remaining focused. So whether that's the visual reminders or, making sure it's in your calendar as well to schedule it. And then intermittent rewards. Decide, okay, at the end of the 21 days, how would you like to reward yourself for what you've done? Not to mention the fact that probably doing it is going to be a reward. It's going to actually be a sense of satisfaction for having challenged yourself and making it happen. So I'm going to have some additional resources available in a circle in the community that'll have this presentation, as well as some of the downloads for a visual reminder. And I also encourage everybody who wants to participate to put what they're actually working on, and you can post there as well for some emotional and community support as you move through it. It's also really interesting to keep a journal and to make some notes to yourself about what's coming up for you mentally, because those are often the same things that come up when we're making other changes in our life. And so as we become aware of it, we can start to interact with it in a slightly different way, hopefully. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And you can also email me or put it in the community, and I'm happy to go through those as well.